Hello and welcome to today's seminar. I got a bit distracted then. I was reading all of the chat on all the different regions that everyone's joining from today. It's so great to see you joining from all over the world. Seeing some snow and some sunshine in different areas. Welcome wherever you've joined from. It's great to see so many of you here. We've got a great lineup for you today, and carry on that chat. We'd like to make these sessions as interactive as you possibly can, or while we're all remotely. So carry on with that chat, and I'd be interested to see discussions going on there whilst we're having our seminar, and make new connections with people. If you're seeing people on this chat down here, perhaps reach out to them and connect via LinkedIn. It'll be really great to keep that discussion going and make new connections. So today's seminar is kindly brought to us today by RS Components. RS have been a massive supporter of CIPS for many years, and we're delighted to be running another seminar series with them. And this is part one in 3 seminars that we're running. So we'll make sure that you get all the links to the up and coming topics as well. They're always really, really popular seminars. So we've got some great content coming in for you. So today's topic is about responsible procurement strategies. Like I say, let's keep this interactive. Make sure that you submit any questions that you have for any of our panelists in the Q&A box. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well, but if you can make sure that questions that you want directed to our panels are put in the Q&A, that would be really useful for me to find them, and I'll try and weave them into the discussion, but we'll make time at the end as well. But make sure you get your questions in nice and early so we can get through as many as possible. And then we are recording this session as well, so if you want to watch back, you may well be watching at a later date. You may have registered and intend to watch back later on demand, or you can share this this recording with your team. So we'll make sure that you get a recording, and again, you can watch back at any time at your leisure. So great stuff. Without further ado, I think we should get started. And I would like to introduce Liam McDade, who is Head of Procurement Governance at RS Components. Welcome, Liam.
Hello, how are we all doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
Thanks for joining us. I just thought it would be interesting to get to know a little bit about you and RS before we get started on our main conversation. So tell us a little bit about your role, Liam, and the work that you do at RS.
Yeah, great, thank you. So yeah, my name is Liam McDade. I am Head of Procurement Governance at RS Components. I have been in the business just over 11 years with a variety of different roles. Procurement governance is quite a new team that we've created back in June, July time under the banner of procurement within our product and supplier management section. So we mainly focus on our direct purchases, so where we are putting stock on the shelf for our customers. So mainly the roles and responsibilities that fall under my remit would be your average BAU sort of procurement activity. So we look at contract governance, supplier onboarding, and also some new product introduction within the product and supplier management community. But above that, one of the things we're embarking on in the journey of responsible procurement is 2 major work streams. So one is the creation of a sustainable product range, and the other is about our end supplier engagement. So how we can start to make a difference and make a positive impact across the board within RS and help change that mindset internally, but also with our strategic partners. The other role is obviously RS is part of a wider group of electro components, and it's also about me helping to connect the dots between the different group companies, because some of them are quite recent acquisitions in comparison to the history of the entire group. So it's not just about changing things for RS internally within the product and supplier management area, but it's also about starting to build those bridges between our sister companies and wider group companies within the electro component space.
Excellent stuff. So we're here today to talk about responsible procurement, and I guess it would be useful for us to kind of talk a little bit about what we mean by that. And I don't want to start the ball rolling on that, Liam.
Yeah, so for me, you'll probably learn by the end of this chat I'm a bit of a simple creature. So apologies if this answer comes to be quite a simple one. But basically for me, it's about an understanding. We've all, anybody that's a procurement professional, we've all been buying goods for a number of years, but now instead of just getting something for the cheapest price or getting something that you need, it's now about having that understanding of the ultimate impact, whether that's a positive or negative impact on the product you're buying. And it's also, in my experience, I keep talking about mindset change, especially internally. For me, one of the biggest things I've been trying to drive in the role is that change of mindset. Some people, from my experience, tend to see ESG or responsible procurement, for that matter, is a separate subject matter. Like, if you're buying something, you'll have your cost targets, your commercial targets, your inventory targets, and people tend to see responsible procurement or ethics or ESG as a separate sort of box to try and get to. Whereas for me, it's about the understanding again of that it's actually woven through every single thing we do on a daily basis. We've been doing these activities for a number of years. It's just about creating that wider social understanding and the environmental and social impact of the product you're potentially purchasing.
Excellent. And how can what's the role of responsible procurement really in building more resilient supply chains, and how well are your customers achieving some of this?
Right. Okay. So I'll try to answer that in two parts. So in terms of about the resilience within the supply chain, for me, again, it's about trying to build confidence. I think we all have to sort of have an understanding that this is really new for some organizations, and it can't just be a day one, toss a grenade over the wall and say, I need you to meet X, Y, and Z. It's about building that confidence and relationships within your supply chain to gain a better understanding of what's going on end to end. And if you can achieve that, then you can help build those better relationships by working together with your suppliers. Now, obviously, there will be some topics within responsible procurement that are a hard stop, and we'll probably come on to that later in the conversation. But for me, you need to work with your partners to learn, open up a dual way of learning and understanding and growing together, because I'll be very shocked if there's no business that this is an important subject matter for. Absolutely. And naturally, people will be on different growth and learning journeys. So one of the things we've been doing, and I can talk about this because I've been doing it myself for the last couple of months, is working with our suppliers and understanding where they are as well. And we have definitely learned some great bits from some of our strategic partners, but quite equally, we've spoken to some of our partners that aren't quite as advanced as we are, and we're sharing that best practice with them as well. Now, in terms of our customers, are they achieving this? If I'm honest, I don't really think I can give you a proper conclusive answer on that. We have, just in RS alone, we have well over 1 million customers. But what I can comment on is we are definitely seeing an increasing growth, not only of requests for products that can help them achieve some environmental efficiencies, but we're also seeing an increase in request on evidence and documentation and policies and procedures that help support this journey.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's gaining those reassurances, isn't it, from your suppliers that everyone's on the same page, and that page will look very different depending on what your organization is. And you talk about different levels of maturity in people's journey, but I guess also it's what the priorities are for your particular business, no matter whatever sector that you're in. Yes, lots to go at. Brilliant. Thanks, Liam. That was really useful. No, so you stay with us, and we'll invite the rest of our panelists to switch their cameras on and join us now. So I'm joined by Maria from Holcim and Mark from, sorry, Mark, just want to get the right
Hounslow.
Hounslow, yeah, sorry. Hounslow Borough Council. Thank you for joining us. Mark, if you could switch your camera on, that would be absolutely great. Maria, do you want to just introduce yourself and a little bit about your role?
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I am the Group Head of Sustainable Procurement in Holcim. Holcim is a company that we produce building materials from cement, roofing, ready mix, and we are present in 70 markets. My role, I'm sitting in the corporate office in Switzerland, reporting to our Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer. So this is not a standard setup. Normally, sustainable procurement is in procurement. I'm not. I'm reporting to the CSO that is also an EXCO. And this is an important thing because everything we do in the supply chain is part of our strategy. And our sustainability strategy has 4 pillars. It's the climate, it's the nature, it's the people, and the circular economy. And I'm responsible for deploying these strategies in the supply chain in the group.
Thank you, Maria. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Mark, tell us a little bit about you and your role.
So I'm Mark Pearson. I'm Head of Procurement and Contracts at a local authority, Hounslow Council. I head up a team of about 30, and we have an annual procurement pipeline in the region of about 500 million. So we deliver services right across the spectrum, from public health, social care, commissioning to regeneration works. Social procurement and responsible procurement is at the forefront of everything we do within Hounslow.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining us. So Maria, I'll put this question to you first, if you don't mind. So responsible procurement, ethical procurement, ESG. Why does it matter to you, and why do you think procurement professionals should care about this?
First, I'd like to define what is responsible procurement. And for me, there are 2 core elements. One is doing the things right, and this is the compliance part. This is the due diligence in the supply chain, being sure that our suppliers pay minimum wages to their employees, they offer decent working conditions. So the compliance part is doing the things right. But then we have the most challenging part, that is doing the right things. And then here we talk about Scope 3 emissions, so the indirect emissions in our supply chain that we are also responsible. We talk about nature, from our packaging or the plastic. And these 2 elements are in the hands of the procurement people. We were talking before the panel start, the role of procurement evolved. And they have in their hands a fantastic opportunity to drive change, to scale up the change. Because in our case, we have 70,000 employees, but we deal with 100,000 suppliers. And each supplier has employees, each employee has families. So I think procurement, with every sourcing decision, every contract they sign, they are setting the tone on the impact our company and our suppliers are doing with in the planet, for the environment, and for the society. So the role is important. And of course, the mission, the traditional mission of procurement is the P&L. They are, I call them the gladiators. They have to fight price increase, but they have also to protect not only the company reputation, but the environment, the society. And just to put an example of how important is the role, I think all of us experienced last year increased price on fuels. So it was like a 34% increase of price. And we started talking about fossil fuels or not nice fuels, which is fantastic because this price increase is supporting the strategy we have to phase out fossil fuels. So our procurement people need to still work in this transition, defeating this price increase, but also finding alternative source. We are using a lot of alternative fuels. I don't know if you are aware, but Holcim is the 2nd waste treatment company in the world. So we are burning waste and replace it with fuels. Yep. So this is a role of procurement, to think out of the box, not just negotiating a lower price, but think alternative sources that will support our company strategy. In our case, is the decarbonization or the net zero journey that we call.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. Mark, Can I ask you the same question, please? What, you know, why does it matter to you, and why should we be concerned about this as procurement professionals?
Well, for me, it's all about the corporate governance. It's all about companies having a leadership position within the role they play, especially for a public sector organisation like ourselves, where we have a community wealth building programme. And we want them to be accountable for their actions. We don't want to employ a supply chain that doesn't care about its impact on the economy or its environmental impact. We want a supply chain that actually shows empathy to our community. And this is why ESG, the environmental social governance piece, is really important. And we are moving on from the CRS role. And I think this is a time of change. And in public sector, we embrace those suppliers that work to our objectives and are not gaming social value just to win contracts.
Yeah.
So it goes to the heart of the contractor itself and their belief in what they do. They don't just believe it to win a contract and then unbelieve it afterwards. So it's very important to have that, like Liam said, that mindset within the organisations that we deal with, especially when you're talking about the potential abuse of the labour market, when you do subcontracting and you sub-supply chains further down, where you lose sometimes that identity of those that are actually doing the work. So very important for us, and as professionals, we have a duty of care, in my opinion, to the organisations that we work for, to ensure that the organisation's reputation is not harmed, but also that, you know, again, with the empathy of the labour markets, to ensure there is no child labour and modern slavery going on. So it's our duty as professionals to uphold that.
Liam, we briefly touched on it, but you know, I think it's important, don't you think, to build a leadership culture of sustainability, that as an organisation, everybody, no matter what their touch point is, whether it's procurement or not, really buys into this, that we hold a mirror up to our own actions and make sure that that's demonstrated in everything that we do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think, like Mark and Maria have touched on it perfectly previously, but we know, like, historically, the nature of the game, and Maria summed it up perfectly, was all about P&L. Profit was always at the forefront of the role, but by stepping into a responsible procurement arena, we now add people in and planet to profit. So when you end up with 3 Ps to focus on now in it, it does make you think differently. And one of the first things you should be doing, and again, I'm talking from my own experience here, is to look at yourself. One of the biggest and most proudest pieces of work that we've been involved with at RS was the old "we've always done it this way" mentality, and we really challenged that at the start of this journey. And to go into a bit of brief detail here, but we always used to, the UK was the central hub of everything, because that's where our organization started. And we used to buy a lot of product and we'd bring it in and we would condition it in the UK, and then we would distribute it around our network. And it was only when we started to bring that focus lens of people and planet into the equation, and I'm talking about end customers is here when we as well, when we talk about people, is we started to say, well, is this the right thing to do anymore? And we diluted our negotiation power ever so slightly, but we started to actually buy more in local market, and that ended up, what we seen there was, we ended up reducing our carbon emissions. We built better relationships and opened the conversation with our suppliers, but ultimately we had product on the shelf quicker to the customer in the local markets, driving an actual end user benefit. And it was a real positive impact for us. And there's a prime example of looking inward first. Again, in my early career, what I used to see is some new legislation or some rule change would come in, and the ultimate sort of culture and mindset change would be, well, we need to make it their problem, and how can we pass that quickly and apply pressure. Whereas now what I'm actually seeing across the board is people stopping and taking accountability and observation of their own supply chains and work ethics before they start looking outward. And I think that's the best place to be.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think there's an authenticity about what people are doing now, and like you touched on, Mark, as well. Like, suppliers not just saying these things to win business, that it really is something that everybody realizes we have to work towards. We've gone beyond the greenwash and storytelling, and now really it's about action and accountability. And I think there's you can really tell those organizations who have that authenticity behind it, and I think that's really critical. Suppliers and customers will see through anything that isn't authentic. Excellent. Liam, if I can follow on from that, so how can responsible procurement practices help to open up opportunities, create value, as well as help to mitigate risks? I guess that, you know, there are positives. I want to look at this more positively, as well as just helping to protect our reputations, etc. And have you got any examples of that?
Yeah, I probably should have saved that last one for this question in hindsight, but never mind. But yeah, we've seen quite a few different things, and as we all know, it's impossible to have zero risk in business. And for me, looking at it from that risk element to start with, and I'll try and answer this in two parts, is it's impossible to have zero risk, but you have to understand your risk appetite as an organization and build what I would call your red lines. Now, one of the approaches we've tried to drive the internal mindset is, again, ESG, we know, covers a whole host of different subjects, that sort of ethics, the ethical side of stuff, the social side, the people side, but also the environmental and the sustainable side. And what we've tried to do is work internally to understand how we can eliminate risk. So one of the key examples we've done is create our ethical trading policy. And again, that's given as a tool to set our minimum expectations and standards with our suppliers, but also it opens that conversation again with them. So we're starting to build the foundations in which we can grow forward and start to go on this journey. One of the other aspects we've done within that sort of red line piece of work I talk about is understanding where sometimes you will need the carrot and sometimes you will need the stick. And what I mean by that is obviously any sort of refusal or acknowledgement of modern slavery or anti-labor practices or anything like that, that's a hard no for us. That's the stick element, I would call it, that where you've crossed that red line and now we've got a risk. But where you fall more onto the sustainable and the environmental side of stuff, again, I kind of alluded to it at the start, where it's more about the carrot approach. We want to work with our suppliers and bring them on the journey. As I always use internally, it's about putting an arm around the shoulder and saying, okay, right, you're not there yet. How can we help you get here? This is where we need you to be. This is what we want. This is the benefit to yourself as well as to us. How can we go on this journey together? What do you need from me to help you? And some of the things we've been doing on the positive side of stuff is building some form of material that we can share with some of those suppliers that aren't advanced as us. So we're paying the knowledge that we learn and commandeer, we're paying it forward, because ultimately it has a benefit for us as well as our suppliers, and ultimately the customer at the end. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll come back to that question, really. I'll come back and ask the others around that, about enabling your supply base. I think it is really critical. Back to the opportunities and the risk mitigation. Maria, can I ask a little bit about what you guys are doing in that area?
Yeah, again, I would say we have to define risk. There are two types of risks that we face in the supply chain. One is the company reputation, but the other is also the supply disruption. And this risk, in our case, as I say, we are in 70 markets, and the level of maturity of the market gives us more exposure. So then you need to put more effort on this kind of risk. We are a very domestic business. So more than 95% of the suppliers are from the domestic market. And I agree with what Liam said. You need to work with them. You will not expect to have the European standards in Latin countries or in Middle East and Africa. But our commitment is to work with them, to engage them, to educate them, and this is part of the due diligence part. No? Of course, you need to understand your supplier base and do your supplier segmentation, because you cannot do this with everybody, but you will partner starting with your strategic suppliers, because they are the one that you will succeed faster to engage, and it's a win-win situation. On the supply disruption, this is the market intelligence of our procurement people. They are the ones who understand what is the development, and if I talk about fuel, we can talk about paper also. In the last year, the price increased very drastically. Many companies moving now from plastic to paper, so there is a capacity in the market that is going to is being booked and triggering higher prices. In this day, we are having a meeting with an interdisciplinary group to rethink our packaging, but this not answering plastic or paper, but with a spirit of circular economy. Can we have, leveraging from our retail network, from our, I talk about the waste company. We have a GeoCycle is our web company. We have a big network. So we are rethinking how we can capture back, how we can partner with our suppliers. And this is the opportunities on the risk management. Is thinking beyond just your operation, thinking the value chain, who are the actors that can help, because we need to deliver in some markets still our products in bags. So whatever type of material, but how can we reuse and bring it back to the supplier to build the same bag with some components of recycled material. These are the opportunities in the supply chain to mitigate the risk, and at the end will end also in the P&L as a result, because maybe they come cheaper, or we can use these bags in a premium product. So at the end, this understanding the risk, understanding the magnitude, prioritizing and putting the right team to think about. Cool ideas are happening today. It's like a brainstorming, and they are having lunch now. As I say, it's lunchtime in Switzerland, and we are wrapping up very cool ideas of reverse logistic of our packaging in some markets, and it's a combination, risk and opportunities.
Great. Mark, if I can ask you as well.
Yeah, for me, it's really about the opportunities to be a fair payer of prices to the supply chain. So again, what Liam was saying earlier on, it's not about the race to the bottom anymore about price. It's the quality price ratio, and that's what we're moving to in the UK in 2023. So we won't have a most economic advantageous tender process anymore. We'll just have a most advantageous tender process. So quality is at the forefront. And I think that drives individual companies to then realize that now that price is not the predominant factor, they can invest within the responsible procurement objectives.
Yeah.
So they can actually start looking inward at their leadership, their culture, and their ways of working. So they can then, on the environment side, minimize impact, and then also be an equality employer as well. So in local authorities, we always like to represent our communities within the supply base, within the supply chain. So the opportunities there is to get more young people ready and employable, so that there's that little bit of resilience when it's needed. And there's another question I'll talk about later about encouraging trades and increasing skill sets, etc. So the creating value comes into a number of areas, but I think that we will pay a fair price. So we're not going to squeeze profits. We're not going to knock on the door and say, you've got to find efficiencies every day. But what we want back is suppliers that are really willing to help us meet our objectives in local authorities, which we have so many on the recovery plan and the audit. And I'll come on to PPN 0620 for another question. And that's the driving force as well for where we want to create value and create opportunities. The mitigation part for me is I've just got to ensure the supply chain understands its responsibilities, that we don't want people that are not willing, like Liam said, to abide by and adhere our objectives. And if they don't serve our community, well, we don't necessarily want them.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely spot on, Mark, because and that comes back to that culture thing, doesn't it? And the way in which we communicate with suppliers and what we're asking for them will that their actions will reflect back in that. So like I say, not in short, showing the weighting on where price is always going to be important, of course, but not being the main driver. I think that's really important. And we touched on it with Liam a little bit, and I'd like to explore this a bit too, about enabling suppliers on this journey. So the culture is one thing, putting those little triggers in and changing our language on our requests, RFPs, or whatever they might be, to say encourage this behavior and this step change. But how do we help those suppliers who are really less advanced perhaps in this area, or perhaps their focus is different to what your focus is? Like say, Mark, you want to reflect what your community is, and I guess priorities will change for different businesses in different sectors on what they're focusing on. So how do you educate your suppliers, particularly those smaller suppliers or less mature on their journey, to get them to start thinking of these things? Mark, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. We've actually undertaken to release 3 videos, and it's all there to support the local community, local business. And what we're saying to them is, if you want any support, any guidance, we're here for you. We're a public body. We're not going to charge you. And if there's any questions that you want to ask us, if there's any signposts into good practice, we would do that. I chair the London Procurement Network, so I'm privileged to have 33 other boroughs around me that I can look to that best practice within London. And it's also about giving to the local supply base that if you want them to change, there is a bit of research and development, maybe investment. There is other things that you've got to take on board, that their prices might be higher in recouping their investment costs. And I think it's also ensuring that there's enough information for them to grow and give them the opportunity to get work. So in Hounslow, any new provider that's not on our supply chain list can have a direct award of up to £30,000 just to get onto into the supply chain door, that they can actually experience what it is like to work for us. And that then allows them to understand how to write the tenders, what we're looking for on the responsible procurement remit. And not all of them understand it. And you've mentioned a great word, authenticity. The authenticity of ESG is the absolute foundation. And if the board or its chairperson or stakeholders don't buy into it, there is no ESG. So there's a lot of work that's being undertaken, especially through central government, that is looking to upskill individuals within companies to understand, especially how to put a tender package together now, rather than, like we said before, gaming it to win a contract. It's got to go to the root and the heart of the business. So we're there for them. And we actually advertise on bus shelters, would you believe, to say, come and join our supply chain. And it worked. Excellent.
Brilliant. Maria, what kind of things, interventions are you putting in for suppliers?
To create this value, I agree, is education. I also think it's inclusiveness. So for education, we have we are organized per regions, and for example, in Central America, we have our annual procurement forum, and we use this opportunity to bring our strategic suppliers and to put an education. Last year with the COVID, we also put, for example, an external organization to explain how run the companies in this COVID side, also the health, the hygiene. The year before, there is always a topic. The year before it was a training on the commercial, how to run their business, how to manage their books. So there is always this education in some markets. In others, of course, you don't need to do these kind of things. Inclusive is very important for me also to generate this value. I don't know if you know, but we, as a company, we have a commitment on CO2 reduction.
Yep.
Not for scope 1, 2, and 3. The scope 3 is in the supply chain. And then we commit, one of the main areas to reduce is our transportation. It's big. We have like 100,000 trucks per year, 2 billion kilometers driven around the world. And 95% of this is driven by third parties. So we don't own our fleet. So when we sign these commitments that is validated by the Science-Based Target Initiative, you start thinking, okay, how is our roadmap? How can we achieve? And then you think in Europe, okay, some regulation will help us, some incentives will help our suppliers. But the cool thing that we are doing in LATAM, we as a procurement in the region, they did 2 weeks ago, like they call the LESS week, low emission solutions. And they invited the supplier of the trucks every week, trucks and mining equipment. Every day there were like 5 suppliers showing the technological roadmap. What technology will be available in LATAM by when, at what cost, what service they will be. And in this roadshow of these big suppliers, we invited not only our procurement in the countries, but also our suppliers. So, and this is the way that we think the value we give them. We mobilize the region, having a big negotiation with the big suppliers, but also we put together access to financing. So if they are interested to partner to decarbonize their fleet, we can also do a contract long-term and we can help you to get access to financing. And this is the way the value is education, but it's also inclusive in the way you drive your business in the regions. Yeah.
Liam, I guess for organizations who operate in different regions, it's about building a vision or objectives that translate across suppliers of all capability, but what resonates in different regions too, would you agree?
Yeah, definitely, and that's one of the sort of approaches we've taken to this. So we're still quite at the early stages of our journey, I think it's fair to say, but we are making some good headway. But one of the aspects we done was we try to segment our business to say where should you can't focus on everything on day one. So where is our focus best spent? So when it came to that, what we done was we segmented our top tier strategic suppliers, and we made sure that we engaged in the local markets as well as at the corporate level with them. And that involved things like having a supplier day where they could come and talk to us about these subject matters. We converted our ESG strategy into a set of tangible goals and measurements, which we shared with them up front. And then we've started to move that into that top tier. I think it's about 380 suppliers across the group, accounts for about 65–70% of our spend.
Yeah,
so it's where we'll get the biggest reward for our initial efforts. And where we've started there is we've started to engage with them around science-based targets. We've also started to understand each other's goals and how we can help each other going forward. And we've also started to look at some third-party involvement with the likes of EcoVadis, and start to gain that visibility, audit, and science-based target control around the top of our supply chain. But we've not just done that as a knock on the door once. We have engaged at local level as well as the top end level to make sure that we're not just doing a broad brush approach that ends up becoming a box ticking exercise. And then quite on the polar opposite end of that, the other place we went at on day one was what we deemed as our highest risk area, which is our private label brand. So again, what we've done with those guys, and what you tend to find is the top end of our supply chain, those strategic suppliers, they are on this journey. They're either further advanced than us or like for like. And that's where we're getting a lot of that sort of knowledge and best practice sharing I spoke about earlier. But when it comes to our private label area, it's not as advanced. It's a bit of a mixed bag, if I'm honest. And what we've done there is we've engaged with the company CIPS, and we're getting an understanding of our supply chain through them. But we're also, again, this is where I come back to that arm around the shoulder. We want to work with our partners. We're going in at local, not just local market level, but plant level.
Yeah.
We're understanding the issues, and then where they aren't as advanced, we're sharing what we've learned. We're also pointing them to public domain information like the UN Sustainable Goals and things like that, so they can start on that journey, but also putting in corrective action plans. But I think I touched on this earlier. For me, it's about opening that conversation to not only just drive what we need, but to understand what they need as well. And that corrective action plan isn't just a list of wants from RS. It's understanding what their strategy is at the same time and how we can work together to ultimately achieve the end goal. Some of the other stuff we've just put in to sort of tie that round nicely is some incentivization.
Yeah.
With obviously we talked about, and I think Mark alluded to it, we've created ESG objectives with our suppliers, but we've also talked about creating award programs and starting to produce some webinars again that we can share with some toolkits with them. But it's just about creating that sort of environment where we're working together but moving forward at the same time.
Absolutely. And this resonates so much with lots of conversations I've had with organisations. There is no one size fits all approach to this. I recently spoke to a large catering company, and some of their suppliers are the likes of PepsiCo and Coca-Cola and Unilever, and you kind of think, well, those guys probably know more about this than I do. Yeah. But 70% of their suppliers are actually farmers, and that they've invested in a piece of land to understand regenerative farming methods better themselves. How can I go out to my suppliers and who probably have few resources and little knowledge on this if we don't understand it ourselves? So I think there are definite areas with different suppliers at different levels that are going to need much more engagement on their journey and true partnership. There are some quick wins to be had at the top level, but I guess it's going further down to those less mature suppliers that's going to perhaps take some effort.
Exactly. And one of the things we started to do was to put it in our QBR and our standard meeting packs as well, because again, it's not about using it is something that I think I alluded to earlier to constantly beat somebody up with, but by having it out there and on display, it becomes part of the everyday conversation. And who doesn't love to see something measured that you see improvement with? Like, it starts to create that little bit of personal competition as well, where we need to work in this area, we need to get this up, and I think that's a good indicator as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Excellent. Mark, I'm going to come back to you now on our next question, and you've touched on it a little bit already, but we're going to talk a little bit about social value, driving social value, and how that can help build more resilient supply chains, but also help us to achieve some of these goals that we're trying to set out.
So resilience for a local authority, in my opinion, is again about the community. So the resilience piece goes hand in hand with our supply base, that if you look at what's coming around the corner, green skills. Now we lack green skills and some of the green skills technology and training. So what we do with our supply chain is work together on a package of training that is required in order to meet the future demands. And also when you look at some of the elements of the pandemic, lessons learned from there about that, the resourcing up and keeping supply chains moving, especially when you had containerization being held at ports, and some of the materials that we required were locked away for some period of time. there wasn't another supply chain we could go to. So we're trying to use social value to create opportunities that will meet demand in the future, but it also serves backwards to, or inwards to our community. Now we like to keep everything local. So we have an employment and skills program, and any contractor coming in will say that this is what they will require. There may be a skill shortage in some of the trades like plastering, brickwork, or some of the service areas and that. So we work together to make sure that social value, especially their commitment in the social value piece, is actually aligned to our community wealth building program. What we don't want is supply chains coming in, giving us their ideas of how they see it in the world of Hounslow. We actually explain to them where the hard to reach areas are, how social value will benefit our community. And it's all about creating that value piece as well, that there's a legacy left, and it's not just what we call a scattergun approach to social value, that you do a piece of work and then you move on and the community look back saying, actually, what was that all about? So our supply chain itself is, I think we've got something like 9,000 vendors on the list, and some are unique to us, but we can identify opportunities as well within the supply chain. And given the PPN, the procurement policy note that the UK government issued on the 1st of January 2021, I believe, that is giving us much more flexibility to embrace ESG. That gives us much more flexibility now to ask questions where previously it was under the Social Value Act a consideration. Now it's mandatory, especially for central government, to be thinking about these aspects. And there's 5 themes, and the very first theme is a recovery from COVID, and it all goes down to well-being. So you can see there's a real change there from how the government see social value, embracing supply chain resilience, and it's about having that ability to change as well. So yeah, 0620 is for my public colleagues, that's what we need to be looking for in the future.
Maria, are you seeing a lot of this? I mean, there's a lot of post-COVID recovery in trying to build back local economies, etc., and building more of that into supply contracts. Are you seeing more social value being added into contracts?
I think after the COVID, the construction sector has the opportunity of all this incentive from the government to mobilize the economy. So we were really recovering fast, and we use a lot of contractors. And as I say, we are a very domestic business. So the post-COVID situation for us is also GDP is not only selling our products but mobilizing the construction. Social value in the supply chain, it can be seen different ways, like you say, the farmers, how you partner with your farmers to teach them to do better the agriculture. We do this something similar with our suppliers. We have small suppliers of raw materials, and we are talking about extracting materials, no conflict minerals, just normal stones that we need. And yes, this is also social value because you partner with them to run their business. They are strategic to us. You educate them to reduce the environmental impact, and they can have a profitable business and to grow up and sell to others. Social value, for example, as I say, waste is very important for us. In some countries in Middle East and Africa, we partner with the communities. There is a nice example in Uganda where we grow the business of coffee. We buy from them the husk because we burn the husk in our kiln to use less electricity. So this inclusive business and this supply chain, how you develop your sources, is also social value. No, there are many components on this, and yes, with our footprint and the characteristic of our business, we are in rural areas and around communities. The opportunity is big for us to generate this social value. If you see in our website, since 2014, we disclose we are using a methodology, social impact valuation. and we disclose the integrated profit and loss statement, where we put together in monetized terms all this value that we create or we destroy to society, because with our emission of our quarrying, we also destroy value. It's a good methodology to also show your footprint in monetized terms, and it's a triple bottom line story. So in our website, you have all the reports for seeing how we measure this social value.
Excellent, thanks for that. Liam, do you see a real role in social value helping to reach some of these targets and mitigate the risk?
Yeah, definitely, and I think Mark and Maria have covered most of the points perfectly. So I'd probably just put a slightly different aspect on it. And one of the changes I've seen that, again, had benefit internally and with some of our more strategic partners is investing in your people and your labor practices internally. Better in your working conditions. We know it keeps employee retention, it makes you more attractive, engagement, productivity all rise. So by looking at that inwards, definitely has a more beneficial impact on your organization as a whole. But ultimately, again, if you can share that across your supply chain, it should have that ripple effect where you start to see everything lift up from that slightly different social impact.
Great stuff. So on to our next question, and Maria, I'll start with you, and it kind of links to a question that we've had from Stuart that's come in as well. And where should procurement teams start when it comes to building an ESG strategy? And Stuart's asked the question, like, is there a standard or general guideline that you're working to achieve this, to implement and measure progress against, etc. Maria, do you want to start on that?
And I would say there is not a starting point. There is also not an ending point. It's a mindset. It's a new way of doing business, and every procurement professional now, they have to have this other dimension to say, okay, I need to buy this, and they need to, as I say in the first question, they are driving. They are in the driving seat. They have to influence the internal users to ask me or to allow me to buy something with some components that are recycle or whatever. And they have to also understand who are my suppliers, with whom I would partner to do innovations. And they also need to understand to whom they can, like you say, the Coca-Colas, okay, with this one, I have to be stronger, or if I have my negotiation power, but I can expect more, and with others to develop more. So it's understanding of your supply chain, understanding of your supplier base, prioritizing, looking the materiality, because in the real life we cannot do everything. So you need to focus your resources and say, okay, what are the battles we need to tackle by when? So it's not a starting point, it's a journey, it's a roadmap, it's a culture, as Liam said, but it's also a target setting. Procurement people, it's not all hard, they are blue minds, they are numbers, so they need to get a performance. And also in our company, we have, the management has also a sustainability performance bonus, even if they believe and they are ESG, but you need to measure, you need to put the money on this and drive performance. As a standard, I would say, depends what type of standard. Liam mentioned the United Nations, so the 10 principles guidelines, the United Nations Global Compact principles, this is a good guideline to start. Every company supplier code of conduct will be based on these 10 principles. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, and there are a lot of sources in the United Nations Global Compact website. When you talk about CO2, there are the greenhouse gas protocol, there are nice guidelines for the scope 3, and even a document for methodology how to measure with different options. So it depending what guidelines, there are many things out there, but there is no beginning. This is a journey, and we need to mobilize, we need to inspire, but we need to measure and also incentivize this change that we want to make.
Thank you, Maria. Liam, can I take that question to you? Where do you start with building this strategy?
Yeah, it is. It is a bit of a wider question, and Maria sort of summed it up greatly there. So I would again point back to those UN sustainable goals. I know when we drafted our own strategy, we then went back and said, right, how many of these goals are we we ticking off? Because not
Yeah.
every business is going to need to cover every one of the UN goals, but it was a good reference point for us to go back to. In terms of sort of like tactical activities, I'd start around things like mapping your supply chain. A review, like we touched on it earlier, Emma, that looking inward is start to map out and review your procurement processes and do what my old boss used to say, like chuck some rocks at them. Like just because you've been doing it a long time, are you doing it the best way, and could you be doing things better? And I think those two activities give you a good soundboard, and most likely by the time you've gone through that journey, you'll have an understanding and you'll start to formulate some ideas. I would also, I think we touched on it earlier again, start to identify where you deem your high risk areas, and that's obviously always the best place to start. Again, you're not going to achieve perfection, and you should never let perfection get in the way of progression. So it's always about just where do we need to put our focus to begin with, and once you've done those activities of mapping your supply chain and your processes, you should start to understand where those high risk areas are and start to focus on them. And then also just looking for some examples online of best practice, and agree those minimum internal standards and start to communicate them with your suppliers.
Yeah, great.
Emma, sorry, I need to say two more standards that are very important. When you will build your process of sustainable procurement, the ISO 2400 is a nice guideline.
Mm-hmm.
And when you want to build your due diligence according to all the regulations that are coming, is the OECD guidelines for multinational companies. So there are step by step how you have to conduct due diligence. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. Thank you, Maria. And Mark, slightly different for the public sector. Some of this strategy has already been put in place for you. So to tell us.
It has. So I've referred to Public Policy Note 0620, but what I would like to say, and I take a little bit of a different view on this, is the ESG seed needs to be sown from the very top. And that's where we talk about the authenticity of the business strategy that the company has. If the company doesn't have that authenticity and governance, then there is no ESG that they can commit to, because they have to show that they are doing many things within that circular diagram of ESG that supports fair pay of workers, whistleblowing, it supports communities, but you need to have building blocks. So I would say a business needs to look inward from the very top, and we call it the why, don't we? The why of the business, and what does it stand for? And if all they're doing is saying that it comes at the very last point in their business structure, then again, they are not really embracing ESG as it should do. So from the top down, that's how I believe it should work. For us in local authorities, we are blessed with central government guidance, and we can interpret that the way that we see fit sometimes. Yeah, ESG is quite new to public sector, in my opinion. We're used to corporate social responsibilities and other acronyms that have gone before.
Yeah, there was a question that came through about the PPN as well, Mark. Do you think that the themes are wide-ranging enough? Have they got the focus exactly right? And do they relate to your own strategic social value priorities?
That's a good question. I personally can't see ESG in the themes in its entirety. I have to wonder where the governance piece is. Social's there, the environmental piece is there, but I can't see where we would look inward again with the governance piece. But it's early days, you know. We've got the Social Value Act that's evolving, being updated, and I think all local authorities will start sharing best practice to get something which we're all consistent with and happy with. At the moment, we're a little bit inconsistent in how we approach ESG and social value and responsible procurement. But there's some very good examples out there as well from private and public to share.
Excellent, thank you very much. Crikey, we've run out of time. I don't know how that's happened. Thank you so much, Maria, Liam and Mark. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
And thank you for your insights. And I can see, Maria, you've shared loads of really useful tools, etc. in the chat. So make sure that you get those links and have a look at that. So thank you very much for your input. That was a really fascinating discussion, and hopefully it's given you a little bit more insight on how you might start on your journey and get going in this area. Apologies we didn't get to all the questions, but we were having a really rich discussion there, so that was really, really useful. We've also popped in the chat a link to the next 2 seminars that are coming up in this series with RS, so please don't forget to sign up to them. This session has been recorded and will be made available from next week, so if you need to listen again, or if you want to share with your colleagues internally, then please do. Also coming up, so a date for the diary to look out for from RS is on the 16th of March. They'll be launching their next survey, and they'll be looking into all sorts of things, including kind of like how you might deliver ESG, etc. So look out for that date, and we'll share that on our social media channels. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we're more than happy to continue to have this debate. But for now, that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you very much to our speakers, and I very much look forward to as many of you joining us as you can next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank
Bye,
you very
everybody.
much.